Karen confronts my child at bus stop, didn't know I'm chief of police and SHE got arrested. Before we dive into the story, let us know where you're watching from. It was one of those crisp, early mornings that felt like the world was still waking up. The sun had just begun to peek through the tall oaks lining the quiet streets, casting soft golden light across the sidewalks. In this small suburban neighborhood, mornings followed a predictable rhythm, garage doors opening, sprinklers humming, coffee brewing in kitchens. The air was calm, peaceful, familiar. Families here knew each other by name. Kids walked or biked to school bus stops without a worry in the world. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved, lawns were well kept, and the most exciting thing to happen in a week might be a new mailbox going up. That was the kind of peace the town had gotten used to. And it was also the kind of peace I was proud to protect. I've been in law enforcement for over 2 decades, and as the current chief of police, I don't just work here, I live here. My family lives here. This isn't just a job to me, this community is my home. Like every weekday morning, I was up early. I sipped my coffee by the window, watching my 10-year-old son button up his light jacket, toss on his backpack, and head down to the bus stop at the corner of our street. He always liked to be a little early to chat with the other kids or just kick around a rock while he waited. It was routine, comfortable. But that morning, something was different. I didn't know it yet, but while I was finishing my coffee, something was already unfolding down the block. Something that would shake the calm of our peaceful neighborhood. It started like any other morning. My son reached the corner where the bus stop sign stood, just beneath the tall maple tree with the half-broken branch. A few other kids had already gathered there, laughing softly and swinging their backpacks around. Nothing out of the ordinary. But then, from across the street, she appeared. At first, my son didn't think much of her. She was just another adult, middle-aged, short bob haircut, sunglasses even though the sun was barely out. She had that unmistakable energy, though. The kind where you can feel someone watching you before you even turn your head. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, glaring. The kids noticed, of course. They got quiet. You know how kids are, they sense tension even when they don't fully understand it. After a minute or so, she walked closer. Not fast. Just a slow, deliberate pace like she owned the ground she was walking on. Then she pointed, not at the sign, not at the ground, but directly at my son. "You can't wait here," she said. Not in a questioning way. It was a statement. Sharp. Cold. My son blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" he asked. "This is the bus stop. We always wait here." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she launched into some rant about property lines, city ordinances, and something about how the homeowners association doesn't allow loitering. Loitering. She actually used that word toward a group of 10-year-olds waiting for the school bus. The other kids stood frozen, eyes wide, unsure if they should step back or speak up. My son, trying to stay polite, explained again that they were just waiting for the bus, same as every other day. But she wasn't having it. Her voice got louder. She demanded to know where the kids lived, who their parents were, and said she'd report them if they didn't leave. That's when things started to shift. My son wasn't scared, he was angry. Not the kind of explosive, yelling anger. Just that stunned, heavy feeling when you know something's not right, but you're too young to fix it. Still, he didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood his ground and waited. Because he knew, just like I had always taught him, that when someone tries to intimidate you, especially for no good reason, the best thing to do is stay calm and remember who you are. He didn't know it yet, but that morning's confrontation was only the beginning. The next morning, she was there again. Same spot. Same folded arms. Same dark sunglasses like she was guarding some top-secret facility instead of watching over a school bus stop. Only this time, she had a clipboard in her hand. The kids hesitated as they approached. They weren't laughing this time. My son glanced at her, then at his friends. He didn't say it out loud, but he was hoping, just hoping, that yesterday had been a one-time thing. Maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she'd forget it and move on. But that's not what happened. As soon as the kids stepped onto the sidewalk, she started writing. Scribbling fast like she was documenting a crime scene. Then came the questions. Again. This time more pointed. Where do you live? Are your parents homeowners here? Did they sign the HOA agreement? The kids looked at each other, confused and uncomfortable. One girl started to cry quietly. My son put a hand on her shoulder and told her it was okay even though he didn't quite believe it himself. Then she pulled out her phone. She started taking photos of the kids, of their backpacks, even of the curb where they stood. One of the older boys asked her to stop, said it felt weird. She ignored him completely. By the third day, word had spread. A few parents showed up at the bus stop not because they didn't trust their kids, but because they were worried about this woman's behavior. A couple of them tried to talk to her. Ask what her issue was. Calmly, reasonably. She wasn't interested in talking. She snapped back with legal jargon, HOA bylaws, and vague threats about bringing this to the board. One dad asked her if she was on the board. She wasn't. Never had been. But that didn't stop her from acting like she ran the whole neighborhood. That morning, when the bus pulled up, the driver gave my son a look, one of those quiet, knowing glances that says, "What the heck is going on here?" Even the driver had noticed. And at home? My son wasn't himself. He still got ready for school without being asked, still made his breakfast, but he wasn't smiling the same. He wasn't chatting at the table or humming to himself like usual. He didn't want to walk to the stop anymore. He asked if I could start driving him. That hit me. This neighborhood, the one I chose to raise my family in, was supposed to feel safe. It was supposed to feel like home. And now my kid was starting to feel like a stranger on his own street. And the worst part? He hadn't done anything wrong. None of them had. The community started murmuring. Conversations at the mailbox, side glances during dog walks. A few neighbors told me they'd had run-ins with her too, petty complaints, passive-aggressive notes, arguments about fence height or garbage bins. But this? Targeting kids? This was something else. This was personal. I didn't find out right away. In fact, my son didn't even mention it the first 2 days. That's just the kind of kid he is, kind, thoughtful, and always trying not to make things harder for anyone else. But by the third morning, when I saw him standing awkwardly by the front door, backpack in hand, waiting for me without saying a word, I knew something was off. "Everything okay?" I asked. He shrugged. "Can you drive me to the bus stop?" That alone wouldn't have been unusual. But his voice, it had that weight to it. Hesitant. Guarded. As we drove down the block, I noticed a few other parents parked along the curb too. And there she was, standing a few feet away from the group of kids, tapping something into her phone like she was logging evidence. I pulled over slowly, scanning the scene. The way the kids were grouped together, the way a couple of parents stood between her and their children, it wasn't a normal morning. After my son got on the bus, I asked one of the other dads what had been going on. He let out a sigh like he'd been waiting for someone to ask. In just a few minutes, he filled me in about the clipboard, the photos, the bizarre questions. How the woman claimed to be part of the HOA board, but no one could find her name on any document. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I listened quietly, processing everything, but inside I could feel that slow burn starting to rise. Not as a cop, just as a dad. Still, I didn't react right away. I needed to understand the full picture. That afternoon, I sat my son down at the kitchen table and asked him to walk me through it, every detail. He was reluctant at first, not wanting to make a big deal out of it. But as he talked, I could see it all over his face, the confusion, the discomfort, the way he tried to stay calm for his friend's sake. He even told me about the girl who cried. That hit harder than I expected. And then came the part one didn't know I needed to hear. She asked me where we live. I didn't want to tell her. I nodded slowly, heart sinking. That's when the lines began to blur. The badge on my desk didn't feel like a symbol of authority in that moment. It felt like a wall between two parts of me. One part said I should handle this through the proper channels, document everything, let the HOA board know, maybe get a warning issued if it got out of hand. The other part of me, the father in me, wanted to walk down that street and let her know, in no uncertain terms, that she'd crossed a line. But I couldn't just react. I've seen what happens when emotions take the wheel, even when the cause is just. I had to be smarter than that. I had to think like both the man who swore an oath to protect this community and the man who promised to always protect his family first. So I started watching. Quietly. Carefully. Because now it wasn't just about some grumpy neighbor with a clipboard. It was about principle. About power. About someone who thought she could intimidate children without consequences. She didn't know who she was dealing with. Not yet. The next morning, I didn't drive my son to the bus stop, I walked with him. We left the house a few minutes earlier than usual. He didn't ask why. He could probably feel something was different just from the way I tied my shoes and grabbed my coat without saying much. As we turned the corner, I saw her. Same spot, same sunglasses, now with a small foldable lawn chair set up next to the stop like she was on patrol. Clipboard in her lap. Phone in her hand. She was already staring us down before we even reached the curb. I told my son he could wait with his friends, and I stepped aside, out of earshot from the kids but close enough to be seen. I folded my arms, took a slow breath, and walked toward her. She looked up when I approached, her expression shifting just slightly from smug to curious. Like she couldn't quite tell whether she should greet me or brace for something else. Morning, I said. She gave a tight, forced smile. Morning. Can I help you? I nodded at the kids. That's my son over there. She glanced at them, then back at me, shrugging like that information didn't mean much. Well, he's been standing on private property. I've already spoken to several of them about loitering. This area isn't zoned for her. I held up a hand, not aggressive, just calm. Steady. Let me stop you right there, I said quietly, my voice even. You've been approaching children. You've taken photos of them without parental consent. You've asked them where they live and accused them of breaking rules that don't exist. She stiffened, folding her arms. I'm part of the HOA. I have every right to enforce the guidelines. You're not listed on the HOA board, I said, meeting her gaze. And this sidewalk? It's public property. The kids are well within their rights to wait here for the bus. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. You don't have the authority you think you do, I said, my tone still low, still calm, but sharper now. And just so we're clear, I'm the chief of police for this town. I've lived here longer than you. I've worked harder than most to make sure this neighborhood stays safe. So let me ask you something. I stepped slightly closer, not threatening, just close enough to be clear I wasn't backing down. What exactly do you think you're doing, intimidating children? What outcome were you hoping for? She blinked. That was the first time I saw it, uncertainty. Like the pieces were finally starting to click into place in her mind. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood orderly, she muttered, her voice losing steam. I didn't know. No, you didn't, I interrupted gently. But now you do. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop photographing minors. You're going to stop confronting them. And you're going to walk away right now without saying another word. If you do anything like this again, you won't be dealing with a warning. You'll be dealing with charges. She stared at me for a long moment, the color slowly draining from her face. Her lips pressed together like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. She folded her chair, picked up her clipboard, turned without another word, and walked back across the street. And I just stood there, hands in my coat pockets, watching the kids laugh and joke again as the bus rounded the corner. I honestly thought that would be the end of it. After our conversation, she disappeared from the bus stop for a few days. No lawn chair, no clipboard, no tension hanging in the air. My son started walking again. The kids went back to being kids. It felt like things were sliding back into normal. But some people don't know when to quit. It started small again. This time, it was flyers taped to stop signs and light poles. Handwritten notices warning about unsupervised minors and unregistered loiterers signed with some fake title she'd made up, Neighborhood Safety Liaison. No one took it seriously, but still parents were irritated. Some laughed. Some didn't. Then came the emails. One of the moms forwarded me a message she'd received. It was a full-on complaint with names, accusations, and even photo attachments of the kids at the stop, including mine. She was sending them to random residents, trying to stir up concern about neighborhood security. At that point, I'd had enough. I pulled everything together, the photos, the flyers, the messages, the witness statements, and took them through the proper channels. I didn't want to be the one to handle it directly, not as the chief. That's not how this works. So I handed it to our internal team and stepped back. And then, one weekday afternoon, I got the call. One of our officers had just made contact with her after another parent filed a report. She had been following kids after school, claiming she needed to see where they lived for records. One of the kids was so frightened they ran home in tears. That was it. The line had been crossed again. So this time, it wasn't a warning. When the arrest happened, it was quiet, procedural, professional, exactly how it should be. 2 officers arrived at her home, asked her to come outside, and calmly explained the charges: harassment of minors, disorderly conduct, and unlawful surveillance. She tried to argue, of course, but her words didn't carry the same edge anymore. By that point, neighbors had begun to gather. A few people stood on their lawns, watching in silence as she was walked down the driveway in handcuffs. Someone muttered about time. Another just shook their head. And me? I stayed at the edge of the street, not in uniform, not giving orders, just present. She saw me. I made sure of that. No anger. No gloating. Just a steady look. Because this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making a statement. It was about protecting kids, mine, yours, anyone's, from people who confuse control with authority. She looked away first. The squad car door closed with a solid click. And just like that, the noise, the chaos she'd created finally began to settle. After the arrest, the neighborhood felt different. Not overnight, but noticeably. Like the tension that had been quietly simmering for weeks had finally lifted. People were talking more. Not just the polite, passing hellos, but real conversations. At the mailbox. On the sidewalks. During evening walks. Some neighbors were surprised it had gone as far as it did. Others weren't surprised at all. Turns out she had a history not with the law, but with people. Complaints about her had been quietly circulating for years. Notes left on windshields. Disputes over garden gnomes and Halloween decorations. Arguments about recycling bins left out too early. Nothing illegal, just enough to make her reputation known, even if no one said anything out loud until now. Once word spread about what she'd done to the kids and how far she'd taken it, it was like the dam broke. Parents came forward. Teachers called to check in. Even the bus driver stopped by the station to thank us for stepping in. He said he'd seen a lot over the years, but never someone treating elementary schoolers like suspects. Then the local news caught wind. A small outlet ran a short piece, HOA member arrested after harassing children at bus stop. The headline made its way to a few regional websites, and suddenly the quiet little neighborhood drama had a broader audience. The article didn't mention names, but people put the pieces together. Most of the comments were the same: unbelievable. Good on the police for handling it. What kind of person targets kids like that? There were a few defenders, of course. A handful of anonymous online voices saying she probably had good intentions, that maybe she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. But the overwhelming tone was clear: what she did wasn't protection. It was control. Harassment. Obsession. And now, the community was rallying in a way I hadn't seen before. Parents organized a rotating schedule to walk kids to and from the bus stop. One of the neighbors painted a little wooden bench near the corner so the kids could sit while they waited. Someone else planted a few flowers by the sidewalk. It wasn't anything big, just small things. But they mattered. It was like everyone had been reminded of something they'd forgotten: that a safe neighborhood doesn't come from rules or titles or clipboards. It comes from people showing up for each other, watching out for each other, knowing where the lines are and making sure no one crosses them. Especially when it comes to our kids, the days following the arrest were a blur of paperwork and legal formalities. It wasn't as quick as some might expect. After all, even a seemingly straightforward case has its own set of moving parts. First, there was the matter of the charges. She was formally booked with 3 counts: harassment of minors, unlawful surveillance, and disorderly conduct. The harassment charge stemmed from the multiple reports from parents and children about her repeated, unprovoked confrontations at the bus stop. Unlawful surveillance was based on her photographing minors without consent, and the disorderly conduct charge came from her disruptive behavior when parents or kids tried to engage with her or walk away. Once she was booked, she was released on bond while awaiting her arraignment. The whole neighborhood waited, some out of curiosity, others out of concern. We'd all seen how far she'd gone, and now we were all going to see how far she'd try to take this in court. Her defense came as no surprise. Her lawyer argued that she was acting in the best interest of the community, that she believed the children's behavior at the bus stop was inappropriate, and that she was merely trying to enforce community standards. It was the kind of defense you hear when someone can't admit to crossing the line. Her lawyer suggested that her intentions were misunderstood, that she didn't mean to frighten anyone, and that the situation had been blown out of proportion. But it wasn't just her lawyer's argument that made headlines, it was her own public statements. After her release on bond, she gave a brief, very controlled interview where she claimed that she had only been trying to protect the neighborhood and that her actions were misinterpreted. She suggested that the arrest was the result of a personal vendetta from a small group of residents and that her reputation was being unfairly tarnished. The more she talked, the more the public turned. Her defense was weak at best, and her self-portrayal as a well-meaning crusader for the community only made her look out of touch with reality. She was being portrayed as someone who'd taken her role as a self-appointed neighborhood enforcer too far, far beyond the boundaries of common sense. As the court date drew closer, I tried to distance myself from the proceedings. I was involved, but I couldn't be seen as a direct participant. I had to allow the legal system to work on its own without my personal feelings influencing the outcome. But there was no denying it, it felt personal. I didn't want this woman in my neighborhood. I didn't want anyone like her making children feel unsafe. The prosecution had plenty of evidence. The photos she'd taken of kids, the messages she'd sent to parents, the witness statements from those who'd seen her harass kids and adults alike. It was clear her actions weren't the result of misinterpretation. And despite her lawyer's best efforts to paint her as misunderstood, the evidence made her case look weak. The trial itself wasn't long. It was more procedural than dramatic, but the community had its eye on it. And while the charges weren't severe enough to bring about a lengthy sentence, there was still the matter of the consequences. When the verdict came, it wasn't the type of sentence that would change her life forever, but it was enough. She was found guilty on the harassment charge and ordered to attend community service, including mandatory training on conflict resolution and youth safety. What followed wasn't just about the court's ruling, it was about the message that had been sent. In a town where people had grown accustomed to taking care of each other, she had violated that trust. And even though the legal proceedings weren't dramatic, they were a clear indication that our community would stand up when someone tried to undermine that trust. In the weeks that followed, things didn't immediately return to normal. It was a different kind of normal, a new understanding of what it meant to live in this neighborhood, to be part of a community. The shift wasn't just in the way we looked at each other, it was in how we moved through the days, how we interacted, and how we cared for the space around us. At first, I thought the biggest lesson would be about standing up for what's right, about taking action when things go too far. And that was certainly a part of it. But the deeper lesson? It was in realizing how easily we can forget our responsibility to protect the most vulnerable. It wasn't just about the kids at the bus stop. It was about all of us, the way we watch out for one another or fail to. It was a reminder that no one should be allowed to wield power, especially over the powerless, without accountability. Personally, I'd learned a lot too. As the chief of police, I'd spent years dealing with crime, policy, and enforcement. But this situation had been different. It wasn't about criminals or legal statutes, it was about everyday people, everyday life. Watching my son grow uncomfortable, hearing the voices of concerned neighbors, feeling that tension in the air, it made me rethink what it really meant to be a protector, both professionally and personally. I'd learned to listen more, to trust more, to remember that some situations require more than just a badge. They require compassion. They require you to truly see the people around you, not just as neighbors, but as part of a larger, fragile system of trust. The neighborhood itself had changed too. The walk to the bus stop became something more than a routine. Parents took turns showing up in groups, chatting with each other while the kids played around. There were moments of laughter, yes, but there was also a quiet, shared understanding that these small, everyday interactions were the backbone of our community. People started connecting in ways they hadn't before, strangers becoming friends, acquaintances becoming allies. One evening, while my son was finishing his homework at the kitchen table, I watched him through the window. He was standing at the bus stop, talking to some of the other kids. The usual group was there, but this time something was different. There were no awkward glances, no uncomfortable silences. The kids seemed at ease again. Their faces were lit up by the early evening sun, smiling and playing like nothing had happened. Like nothing had come between them and their neighborhood. That was the moment I realized what had changed. It wasn't about the arrest or the media attention or the legal proceedings, it was about reclaiming that sense of safety, of peace, of belonging. And it wasn't just because of the rules or the law or the things that could be enforced. It was because the community had learned to speak up for each other, to step in when things went too far, to support the vulnerable even when it wasn't easy. And for me? Well, I understood now more than ever that the role of a protector isn't just about upholding the law. It's about understanding the people you're protecting. It's about seeing the smaller moments, the ones that slip by unnoticed, and knowing they matter. Looking back, it's clear that this wasn't just about one person pushing boundaries, it was about a community coming together to protect what really mattered. It wasn't just the incident at the bus stop or the woman with the clipboard. It was about the ripple effect of her actions and how it brought out something stronger in all of us. We learned that power isn't something to be taken lightly. It's something that has to be used responsibly, especially when it involves our children, our neighbors, and our sense of safety. And that sometimes the real strength lies not in how loudly you speak, but in how you stand firm when something isn't right. Through all of it, we saw the importance of trust, of taking care of one another, and of stepping up when it matters most. People came together in ways they hadn't before, neighbors became friends, and the sense of security we all took for granted was renewed. But it's also a reminder, how often do we overlook the small signs, the ones that might hint at something bigger? How often do we stay silent when something doesn't feel right, thinking it's not our problem? And when we do finally speak out, are we ready to back up our words with action? In the end, it's not just about following the rules, it's about knowing when to stand up, when to speak out, and when to protect what really matters. So, I'll leave you with this. How far are we willing to go to protect those who can't protect themselves? And how far are we willing to go to ensure our communities remain safe, trusting, and united? It's a question worth asking and acting on.